Welcome back to the garden. I'm Kaylee, this is Rooted Revival, and today we are diving back into seed saving. And we're gonna save a seed that not a lot of people grow in their garden, but this plant is perfect for the fall garden. So let's dive in. Do you recognize this plant? You might not, because frankly, it's not a plant that a lot of gardeners really grow in their garden anymore. And even if you do, you might not have ever seen it in this stage, because this is a plant that usually doesn't get this size. In fact, we're usually harvesting it for what's underground. This is a parsnip. So once upon a time, the parsnip was actually a very popular crop. In fact, it was a staple crop in the Middle Ages. But something more popular came along, which was the potato. And frankly, the parsnips just never really came back in style. So if you have been lucky enough to have a parsnip, it's probably been homegrown or from a farmer's market or something like that. They're really hard to find in conventional stores these days. So what exactly is a parsnip? Well, it's actually a root veggie, and it kind of looks like a white feral carrot. They get really big, but they look like a carrot. So they're not quite as sweet as a carrot, and they're a little bit starchy, almost like a potato, which is why the potato kind of won out. It was just a little bit easier to produce, and frankly, the parsnips just never really caught back up, but they are delicious. And what also makes them great is that they're a really good winter food crop because they're incredibly tolerant of cold weather and frost. In fact, we usually plant them in the fall, and then I've harvested mine all the way up through February. And even after a few frosts or being in the frozen ground, they stay really good. And in fact, they get sweeter after a few frosts. Much like a carrot, it's usually harvested for its root, and it's got this big old taproot, again similar to a carrot, and that's usually how it's eaten. But if you leave it in the ground, it's going to produce these amazing flowering stalks, and it's going to produce seed heads, which we can save for future harvests. So if you've grown a carrot, it's very similar. Parsnips are actually in the carrot family, so that's why they have so many similarities to a carrot. And just like a carrot, it's going to take 2 years if you want to save seeds from the parsnips. So they are a biennial crop, and what that means is that during the first year of the crop's life, it's going to focus on root production. That's how they get those big old roots, and then it's also going to focus on producing the above ground leafy growth. Now, if you leave it in the ground, what's going to happen is it's going to basically have a winter period where it goes through the winter, and it's going to take all of that energy and store it in its root. And then once the weather warms up, it's going to send up a flowering stalk. And eventually, once those flowers are pollinated, they're going to produce seeds. So it produces these gorgeous yellow flowers on these big old umbel heads. And those are so fantastic for attracting all sorts of pollinators to your garden. But you might be surprised as to what is the most common pollinator of these plants, and it's actually flies. So particularly like the bottle fly, which is like a greenish gold fly, and you might see them hovering around the plant. So it just goes to prove all types of insects can be pollinators. So if you see flies buzzing around, don't worry. They are just here to help pollinate your plant. But you might also see a bunch of other beneficial insects. The umbel flowers of the carrot family are really good at attracting a variety of different insects, and particularly ones that are really good for our garden, which is another benefit of saving seeds. Is you're going to have more flowering plants in your garden, and it's going to be attracting a wider variety of beneficial insects to your garden. Since parsnips are pollinated by insects, it actually helps if you have a handful of them that you can leave to go to seed. It's going to just help with pollination rates and diversity. So the more that you can save, the better. But again, you don't need a ton. Even a small patch like this is going to give you a lot to pick from. I think there's probably 4 or 5 plants here, and then I have a couple on the other side of the garden as well. So over on this side of the garden, I have this giant parsnip, and it is not uncommon for these flowering stalks to get 2 feet on average, which is about what those ones are that we saw on the other side of the garden, all the way up like this one, which I am 5'4". Let's see, if I stand about here, which is where the bed is, you can see I'm still only about there. So this plant is probably 6 feet tall at this point. And what that is it's this main flowering stalk that's coming up, and then all of these secondary flowering stalks off of it. With your parsnips, as with any plant, all of these seed heads are going to develop at a little bit different rate. That's completely common with any type of plant. So the umbel head, the seed head that you see at the top, that big flowering head at the top, that's usually the very first one to go up, the first one to get pollinated, and the first one to develop seeds. It's also usually considered the highest quality seeds. After that one, the plant's then going to send out these secondary stalks and basically have smaller umbel heads on them. So the one at the top is going to be your cream of the crop, and then these are your secondary ones. So when we're trying to figure out if these are ready to be saved for seeds, we want to look at a couple of things. Number one, the first process that we're going to see is the flowering. And after the flowering, once pollination happens, the petals are going to fall away and we're going to start to see these seed heads develop. Now they start out really green, very soft. You can see these ones are turning from green to brown, so they're starting to get more mature. And then eventually they'll look like these ones in the middle. So you can see these ones here from the middle have actually started to really develop into these beautiful seed heads. They are brown, they have dried back, and now it's time to harvest them. So once the seed heads do begin to die back, you'll find that they actually fall away from the plant really easily, especially on a breezy day like this. So you want to start harvesting them at this point before they start falling off the plant, because you don't want to lose the seed, and frankly, volunteer parsnips everywhere isn't ideal. So if you're concerned about the seeds falling off, or if you're just running out of space and you need that space available, what you can actually do is cut them at this stage once the seeds have developed and they are starting to turn brown, but they're not all the way brown yet. That's the perfect time that you can actually cut them and hang them in a well-ventilated space. I like to hang them on the dark side of our potting shed / greenhouse. And I just hang them upside down in bundles, and I'll usually put like a container of some sort below them, and they'll actually finish ripening those seeds over time, and then they'll fall into the container below, or at that point you can go ahead and thresh them, harvest them, all of that. But we're gonna go ahead and cut a few of these ones that are completely ready today, and a few of these that aren't quite ready, and I can show you how we are going to clean and harvest the seeds of the ones that are ready. I am going to put on gloves before I harvest these. The actual plant itself does have a pretty good concentration of essential oils that gets concentrated in the seed heads. And so if you have sensitive skin, sometimes that can cause irritation, especially if you're out in direct sunlight. Those oils can obviously intensify the sun and cause almost like a burn on the skin. So to avoid that, we're going to wear gloves while we're harvesting these. What I'm going to do is just come down the stalk and cut them and drop them into my bucket. What you'll probably start noticing is that even on these secondary stalks, the central stalk on it is going to be the one that's the most developed and the most ready to be harvested for seeds. So I'm just separating these out. I'm putting the ones that are completely ready in the bucket, and the rest of them I'm putting to the side so that we can bunch them and hang those. We've got our bucket full of beautiful seed heads that are ready to be harvested. We have a whole bundle of more seed heads that will continue ripening, so we'll hang those. Then what's left is basically this stalk here. So what I could do at this point is just cut it at the base and leave the root in the ground. And what's going to happen is it's going to go ahead and decompose. It's going to aerate the soil, feed the microorganisms, the worms, all of the decomposers in the soil. That's the no-till way to do it. Or if you prefer, you can also twist that out of the ground and basically remove it altogether. If you have a problem with slugs or things like that, I would recommend going ahead and removing it, but they can go quite deep. So it's a nice taproot to have to add aeration to your soil. And again, that will decompose and leave channels for all those microorganisms as well as food sources. So that's kind of the no-till way to do it. Harvesting the actual seeds of your parsnips is really pretty easy, especially if they're dry enough. You can see they're already falling away. Now you might want to use a bowl or a container to collect them all, but for right now I'm just going to drop them directly onto the counter surface, and you can start by just simply doing this. So this is going to break up most of them, going ahead and loosening up all of those seed heads that are ready. So you can go through and do that. Of course, for the ones that are going to want to stay on the plant, you can further work those off. But if they're ready, they generally fall off very easily like that. So we're just going to go ahead and do that until we have a whole bunch of seeds here to work with. So with your seeds, there's actually two parts to it. So there's the seed, which is on the inside. So that's generally this darker area that you see. And then this lighter wing part out here is actually the chaff. Now you might see a couple like these ones here. These are the actual seeds themselves right here that have fallen out of the chaff. So you do not need to separate out these seeds from the chaff. What we mainly want to get out when we're cleaning the seeds are the bugs, the little sticks, things like that. But generally these are extremely easy seeds to save. You saw how easy that was. We basically just knock the seed heads loose, and then what we can do next is package them up. So I like to put mine either in a paper envelope or in a plastic bag or a Mylar bag. All work very well. And then be sure you label and date them. Now, one important thing to know about parsnip seeds is that unlike a lot of seeds, these don't last a long time. So some seeds will last years. Parsnips are not that way. Parsnip seeds are best used in the following year after they're harvested. So since we harvest them in the summer and parsnips are generally planted in the fall, it's best to go ahead and just use these right away to plant them. So generally with parsnips, since they do need to get planted right away, if you let just a few of them go to bloom, you'll never need to buy parsnip seeds again, and neither will all of your friends. You'll have an abundance of parsnips. Happy seed saving! I'll see y'all next time.